experts. Okay, so let's welcome our first guest speakers for the day. We have Ivan Barrios and Alice Ancona with their presentation, How International Trade Has Changed in 2020. They'll be discussing changes and trends in the international market. Ivan is the president and CEO at World Trade Center Miami, and Alice is the senior vice president and COO also at World Trade Center Miami. Welcome, Ivan and Alice. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great, Dan. How are you?
Good morning.
Wonderful. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. It's a wonderful initiative, and we certainly appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dan. Well, I guess I'll kick it off, and I just want to start off by saying I want to thank the entire GLT team for giving us the opportunity to talk to you about the World Trade Center Miami and how trade has changed in 2020. As we know, the COVID crisis has really thrown a monkey wrench into our industry. So I just want to talk a little bit about the World Trade Center Miami, and then I'm going to introduce Alice Ancona. And Alice is basically a trade guru for us. She really knows how to massage the numbers, read the numbers for trade. And so I'm going to kick it off by just telling you who we are and what we do, and then Alice is going to talk to you about how trade has changed in our industry. So the World Trade Center Miami is a private nonprofit organization dedicated to helping grow two-way trade in Miami and support small and medium-sized businesses by connecting them to the global marketplace. And of course, for us, the global marketplace is Latin America, the Caribbean, Europe, and hopefully soon will be Asia. Our board of directors is comprised of local business leaders. Our current chairman is Roberto Munoz, who is Miami Market President for First Horizon Bank. And our vice chair is Virginia Sanchez, Regional Director for Government Affairs for American Airlines. Other members of our board are importers, exporters, attorneys, people who are involved in international trade. We do have a small board of directors, it's 24. And the World Trade Center is basically the voice of international trade and logistics for our community in Miami. We facilitate international commerce in Miami, and we champion and advocate for international business. This keeps trade moving through our airports and seaports, therefore creating jobs. And jobs in Florida, and in Florida's trade and logistics industry pay about 30% higher wages than the average state wages. And the World Trade Center Miami is part of a global network of 323 World Trade Centers located in 93 countries. The World Trade Center is currently creating a platform right now where we can match up local companies with potential business partners across the globe. So for example, if you're a company, let's just say there's a company in Cali, Colombia, who's looking for a Miami trade partner, they can call the World Trade Center Miami and we will help them hook them up in terms of what they're looking for in terms of products and services. Also, like I said, we were creating the process of creating the database, and we recently emailed a survey to 4,000 companies requesting information on their product lines and services. If you have not received a survey from us, if you want to be included in our database, you can just send us an email at info@worldtrade.org. So that's info@worldtrade.org. The listing is free, and we would send you the survey, and you fill it out, and like I said, there's no charge. The World Trade Center Miami also organizes several events in Miami to promote our international business community, and provide network opportunities for our local business. We host the annual International Women's Day Luncheon to celebrate the United Nations Women's Day every March. And the World Trade Center Miami, what it does, it honors 5 local business women who have done the most to promote international business or enhance the international business community in Miami. And the event is usually attended by over 600 people. The World Trade Center Miami also organizes and works with local business organizations to host over 25 events during the month of May to celebrate Miami World Trade Month. And World Trade Week and World Trade Month is celebrated the month of May throughout the United States. So we do a lot to promote our industry during that month. We have tours of the Port of Miami, the airport. We have a whole series of events with US Customs and Border Protection and 5 other regulatory agencies to promote, how do you import your product into the United States and what's the best way to bring your product into the United States. Because of the COVID crisis, the World Trade Center Miami created a supply chain lift committee, which was comprised of local business leaders and government and to help locate the much needed personal protection equipment and ventilators for our community. And that committee was started in March, and we just disbanded it 2 weeks ago. And we were able to facilitate leads looking for masks, sanitizers, ventilators, and other medical equipment that we needed. So it was pretty successful. Also, the World Trade Center Miami organizes the annual America's Food and Beverage Show, featuring 500 exhibitors from over 25 countries promoting their products and services. And we have over 6,000 buyers that come to the show. This year's show is scheduled for November 2nd and 3rd at the Miami Beach Convention Center. And for more information on that, you can go to our website or go to the americasfoodandbeverage.com website. And finally, the World Trade Center Miami organizes the Air Cargo America show. This show has basically been going on since 1991. And it's held every other year. And the show features 150 exhibitors promoting, trade their products in trade and logistics. We have over 4,000 people that come to the show in 3 days. GLT is one of our major exhibitors, and the show will be held October 26th through the 28th, 2021 at the Miami Airport Convention Center. And this year, we are also starting a new conference called the Supply Chain Americas Conference that will be held parallel to Air Cargo Americas. And this will be a 3-day conference held in the morning before the Air Cargo Americas exhibition opens up at noon. And it'll talk about the latest trends and topics of the supply chain industry. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to present Alice Ancona, Senior Vice President Chief Operating Officer of the World Trade Center Miami. Alice, before she came to the World Trade Center Miami in January, was the Director of International Policy and Trade for the Florida Chamber of Commerce. And she also helped establish the Florida's Institute of Trade and Logistics. So she is our trade guru. She really knows how to read the numbers. And I'm just gonna hand it off to Alice right now so Alice can tell you how much trade has changed in 2020.
Thank you, Ivan, and hopefully everyone can hear me well. So I'd like to begin the presentation with just kind of this quote from Tale of Two Cities. We came out of 2019, beginning 2020, looking at potentially what could be an improving trade scenario. The US and China had negotiated a phase 1 trade deal. While tariffs were still in place, we were hearing from the US administration that there was not going to be an increase in additional tariffs. We saw traction on the North American Free Trade Deal, USMCA, and we were looking forward to an improved trade environment beginning in 2020. But then, of course, we had COVID. So these are the announcements from both the International Monetary Fund, as well as what you see on the right from Foreign Policy Magazine. We were looking at end of December, beginning of January, some sort of recovery in trade, potentially some increases up to about 3% in global trade. Again, this was end of December, beginning of January 2020. So we were looking at an improved environment, hopefully for 2020, and of course things have changed since. Now, what we're seeing in terms of reports is, of course, announcements from the UN and the WTO on trade falling. Q2, which began in April, they're projecting a decline of about 27% in trade, again, due to COVID. The World Trade Organization is expecting a decline between 13 and 32% by the end of 2020 in global trade. Q1 was not as impactful. We did see a 5% in decline, but of course Q2 is where we're expecting to see some of the impacts, and I'll be sharing some of that data with everyone. Trade is expected to contract as a result of COVID by the end of 2020, deeper than the financial crisis in 2007 and 2008. And again, I'll share some of that data with the going forward slides. So this is global GDP growth. This is from the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas. So they are showing you projections of where we're looking at GDP drop off globally. Emerging economies are in the deep blue on top. Advanced economies, so that excluding the United States, is in red. So that's including the EU. And the US is in yellow. So we do see where the global GDP declined at the end of the financial crisis in 2008. but we're beginning to see the numbers on the far right of where GDP is going for 2020, and we're beginning to see those declines globally on GDP. Now I'll go over a little bit of the numbers on trade in the time of coronavirus. And of course, I'll do a little bit of a recap of where we were in 2019, just to give some perspective, and then go into the 2020 numbers that we're beginning to see. Much of that data is available through April 2020. So again, the beginning of Q2. But we'll get some numbers on merchandise trade into June, which will give you some preliminary ideas on trade movements and trade flows. So this, to give a snapshot of where we are, the GDP of the United States is 21.4 trillion. The Federal Reserve Bank and the Congressional Budget Office is expecting a 5% decline in US GDP by the end of 2020. So that's a significant punch. The GDP of Florida is $1.1 trillion. That's where we're coming from, Miami, Florida, Ivan and I. To give a little perspective of where the GDP is of Florida, if we were a country, we'd be the 17th ranked in terms of GDP globally. So we're about slightly smaller than the country of Mexico, for example, in terms of GDP. In terms of US states, we are 4th ranked. Again, these are numbers at the end of 2019. As far as South Florida is concerned, which is the Miami marketplace, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach, we're at 354 GDP. So that's equivalent of the GDP of Hong Kong, for example. So this is a sizable economies that we're dealing with here from Miami and Florida in terms of GDP rankings. In terms of trade, why does trade matter, and why as an organization, the World Trade Center, we're focusing on trade? In the state of Florida, 1 in 5 jobs depend on trade. This includes foreign direct investment, services exports, travel and tourism, as well as goods and services. Florida is ranked 7th in the US for origin exports, and we'll use these numbers interchangeably. Origin exports are products that are made in the state of Florida, so we're higher ranked when it comes to merchandise trade. Florida's 4th ranked in the US for services exports. So many of our markets here in Florida, places like Miami, and Orlando, and Tampa, are major services export providers for the United States. When we talk about services exports, services are everything that isn't made or mined. So agriculture, not including agriculture, so engineering, architecture, education, and of course, transportation and logistics as a service. And more than 58,000 companies in Florida export, and that accounts for about 20% of all US exporters in the United States. So Florida is a trade state. We are very much focused on international trade, and the global marketplace and global trade flows impact our GDP and our economy fairly significantly. For Miami, to give you an idea of where we rank as a trade region, we exported $35 billion, almost $36 billion at the end of 2018. That's more than the state of Alabama, or the state of New Jersey, or the state of South Carolina, or the state of Tennessee. So as a market, Miami marketplace, we export more than some states in the United States. We're the 9th largest exporter among US metros. And in the bottom, you'll see our export categories and of course our top export partners. No surprise, most of our export partners are in Latin America, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Paraguay, and Chile. And in 2018, we did see a little bit of a drop off for Brazil. We all know what was happening in Brazil, changeover elections, etc. Mexico has risen in prominence in terms of trade with Miami, and in particular with Florida. When we talk about opportunities, the new NAFTA or USMCA or the North American Free Trade Agreement, the Canadian and the Mexican market account for about 14% of Florida trade. So USMCA is an important development for us here in the state of Florida as well. So now we'll begin to talk about where we are in terms of COVID and the impact of trade on our economy and on our trade figures. As you can see, I have Q1 in the bottom for export destinations as well as import destinations, and then April figures which are coming in. They were just recently released, so you can see the declines in trade. We have seen some growth. Q1 was not as impactful. It was not as a significant change in trade numbers at the end of Q1, just a 2% decline in origin exports. So again, products that are manufactured in the state of Florida, and then a 0.6% decline in imports. It isn't until April that we start seeing significant numbers, but we do see shifts in trade, in particular when it came to Florida trade and our trading partners. No surprise, you see Q1 Brazil as a top export destination. We saw growth in Q1 with trade with Brazil, but by April it was more than an 8% decline. On import sources, we no longer factor Brazil there. It's been such a decline in terms of our trade in Brazil as a result of COVID for April 2020. But we do see some interesting shifts. The UK has been one where we've seen major movement, as well as some markets in Europe. And this is in part because during Q1, as we know, China began to shut down, trade began to shift, but also we started importing, not just in Florida, but Florida becomes an import gateway for the United States. So we're importing not just for our state, but also for distribution into the rest of the United States. PPE equipment, products, et cetera, ventilators from all over the world, and the UK being one of the major producers of these kinds of products. We saw increases in our trade with Japan. Again, some of the shifts from China closing down. We saw trade flows move. That was a big jump for Japan. And if you look at import sources for the state of Florida, you see the big jump in Ireland, particularly in Q1. It's beginning to slow down in April. Ireland is not a top 20 trade partner for Florida, but all of a sudden it was number 2 as a result of COVID. And what we were importing from Ireland is organic chemicals at significant numbers. And this is what's used to make prepared products, medicaments, et cetera. Again, we're assuming that much of this is for COVID. And then on import sources, you also see growth from Vietnam. Some of this growth is related to the tariffs with China. So we started seeing supply chain shifts away from China into Vietnam, and Florida started moving in more product from Vietnam, but also COVID related. So of course, Chinese factories were closed. We were sourcing from other parts of the world. But as you can see, we've seen declines in some of our major trading partners, such as Latin America, the Caribbean, and other parts being hard hit. Germany, you see those numbers there as well. Germany is one of the top 5 trading partners for Florida, and that's already seen a decline. Much of this is COVID related, but this is of course short-term trade flows and how they impact. And of course, Florida being an important gateway for the US, many of these products are not Florida final destination, but US and the East Coast final destination. So now we'll look at US numbers and compare them to Florida. So we can see declines in origin exports through April 2020. Florida is not that much off from where the United States is in terms of trade declines from origin exports and imports. But in the bottom, you'll see 2 charts. This is merchandise exports to the world from the US and merchandise imports from the world to the US. And what we're seeing here in terms of trade flows, and the merchandise trade is now dated for June 2020, and this comes from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. We're beginning to see the movement downward on trade in terms of merchandise exports and merchandise imports from the world. And merchandise trade is not necessarily origin trade, so it's product that we move that is not necessarily made in the US. It could be made elsewhere, and it's coming through the United States and through Florida in transit. And again, you can see the comparison of the drop-off in trade flows from the 2008-2009 financial crisis. We do see the financial downturn. We do see the downturns in trade going forward. Now I'll talk a little bit about sectors. So this gives you some idea of where trade flows are by sector. This is through April 2020. So the image on the left, which is sector trade in 2020, red is the first quarter. So you see the declines. Just about every single trade sector has been impacted by COVID. On the right, you do see medical products that have been separated. And of course, we've seen exports in medical products more than double. No surprise, but that gives you the figure of where things are. Now I'll go back to the slide, the image on the left, the blue. You notice office machinery in April exports have increased, or trade with office machinery has increased, in particular beginning with April, which is the beginning of Q2. And this is reflective of China coming back online. And then, of course, many organizations, many companies, you know, the World Trade Center being no different, have shifted to working from home. So many have had to move supplies to people's homes, computer equipment, printers, scanners, etc., laptops, all you may need to operate a home office. So that's in line with no surprise there. But again, some of those trade flows are beginning to be adjusted by reflecting China coming back online going forward with trade. And here we see the impact of COVID and regional trade across the world. So as you can see, there hasn't been a region of the world that hasn't been impacted in one way or another by COVID. You see the declines both in Q1 and in April trade numbers. And in April is where you see the dramatic shifts, double-digit declines across the most of regions. The developing markets, emerging markets have been the hardest hits. Of course, many of these developing and emerging markets are export dependent, and they depend on their trade with primary markets such as the United States and Europe, which have not been buying. So demand has been down for a lot of products from the developing and emerging world. But we do see Latin America, you see import and export declines of 20 and 30% for the month of April. That's the beginning of Q1. Beginning of Q2. But of course, Southeast Asia has been receiving the least impact. So you see Australia and parts of the South Pacific have not been as hard hit. And then you see the numbers towards Asia, you know, they were the first to come into COVID, feel the impacts, and they're back online while much of the world is still in shutdown and beginning to open back up in terms of production. But China's coming back online, and you do see that the hits have not been as dramatic as in other parts of the world. Now we'll talk a little bit about supply chains. Many of you on this webinar, as well as GLT, are supply chain providers. This was a survey from Barrrios that came out on 11th of June, where they surveyed supply chain professionals on what they're seeing in terms of movement and flows, etc. 97% of them did experience a supply chain disruption, no surprise as a result of COVID. And 73% of those organizations are now planning major shifts in their supply chain. Again, no surprise, we do see that, I'm sorry, I think I got ahead. I got ahead here, I apologize. We do see that 73% of the organizations are now planning major shifts in procurement. 59% of the respondents believe that they should be, supply chain should be localized and bringing manufacturing either back to their region or back to their local communities. 37%, 34% of business leaders believe that the worst has passed us, but I think the figure that's more telling is that 50% of supply chain leaders believe that the worst is yet to come. So the first 6 months, they don't think that we've seen the worst impact. They do feel that we're going to still see a greater impact coming into the next 6 months. So that's pretty telling of where we are and what supply chain leaders are looking at. Here is a chart on Global Purchasing Managers Index. Again, no surprise, demand has been down. There's not been a lot of production going forward, but again, no surprise on what we see in terms of the downturn of purchasing across supply chain managers globally. Much of the news, many of you from all over the world have probably seen a lot of talk about supply chain shifts, where we can be going as a market, what would be happening going forward. The Trump administration early in May announced that they will be targeting select industry sectors to bring supply chains away from China back to the US. They have approached several trading partners, so it's not just the US, but back to the Americas and the Western Hemisphere. So they are working with particularly those countries that we do have free trade agreements with here in the United States. But across the world, many are now looking at whether it's for life sciences supply chains or supply chains in general. to make a shift away from China, or to develop a China plus one strategy for trade, for supply chains and manufacturing. So we've seen reports from banks, Merrill Lynch, Citibank, et cetera, as well as other studies, as leaders are looking at making supply chain shifts in the next coming months. Some of them are already exploring markets in the Western Hemisphere. Of course, the US being an important market for consumption. And then, of course, opportunities and risks. So you'll see an article up there from the IMF expressing concern on economic growth in Latin America. And for Florida, Latin America is an important market. You've seen some of our trade partners, our primary trade partners for the state of Florida is the hemisphere. And about 60% of US trade flows to Latin America go through the state of Florida. So we're responsible for more than half of the trade with the region in terms of trade movement, logistics, distribution, shipping, air cargo, et cetera. And this is both import and export trade with the region. So for us here in Miami in particular, and in Florida overall, Latin America is an important region of growth. But we're also looking at other opportunities, whether the launch of negotiations for a US-UK free trade deal. The UK is also an important market for us. And of course, you saw the trade numbers that I showed earlier on trade with the UK growing with Florida. It is an important investment partner. The UK is #1 for foreign direct investment in the state of Florida. Over 600 UK-based companies are based in the state of Florida. So it is a market for investment. Much of that investment in the state of Florida is manufacturing. So when we look at supply chain shifts, what that means and what impact that may have for us, we're hopeful that these will be positive news, at least for us here locally. And then, of course, we're looking forward to USMCA, or the new North America Free Trade Deal, or the new NAFTA taking effect on July 1. We're hopeful that some of those trade flows may be kicking back in. Production in Mexico has been important. Trade with Mexico has been fairly significant. And Canada is our #1 trading partner. I think most people assume, well, a lot of our trade is with Latin America, and Brazil is certainly significant. For the state of Florida, Canada is a top 3 trading partner in imports, exports, services, as well as investment and visitation. So across the board, Canada impacts our economy fairly significantly. So NAFTA becomes an important matter for us as we look forward to new trade developments in the region. Of course, we are looking at concern with the EU and what's happening with Brexit, but these are major markets for us, and we're both cautiously optimistic as well as somewhat concerned with what's happening in Latin America and what could mean for trade going forward, if this is another lost decade. And that concludes my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I think we'll move into the Q&A section.
Okay, well, welcome back. I really appreciate that. I think, Ivan, do you have something further to say? I think you're muted there, right? Okay, we need Ivan unmuted.
All right. There we go.
Yep, you still have.
No, I think we're good. I mean, if we have some questions. I know some questions were on the chat.
Yep.
I don't know, Dan, would you like me to read them, or would you like to read them?
I'll be more than happy to read them to you. Here we go.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have our also Q&As as well. Okay. Question from Michael Chalman. 2020 is a significant U.S. election year. What sort of impact, if any, would you typically see on international trade in an election year? And how do you expect 2020 to differ, if at all?
Well, I'll start with that, and I'm sure Ivan will chime in. So we're already beginning to see a lot of the news. The administration is looking at, what's happening with China. So of course, we saw at the end of 2019 a phase 1 trade deal with China. So now all of a sudden there was a hope at the beginning of this year, 2020, for some good news on the trade front for China, and the administration was going to tout it as a victory. But now with COVID, I think we all, especially in the United States, get to see the media and the shift towards anti-China rhetoric. So trade with China will certainly be part of the conversation for the U.S. For this upcoming election in November. I think the administration has particularly focused on China and trade. They will likely, we do have a new USMCA or renegotiated MCA, so this was another goal of the administration. So as far as conversations, as well as rhetoric, as well as positioning in terms of the election, trade will certainly be a conversation and a talking point on where Democrats are versus Republicans on trade, and what we see in terms of going forward. Many are very concerned. Obviously, we're looking at projections of a 5% decline on U.S. GDP. Trade is a big part of our GDP and how we grow economically here in the U.S. So I can't foresee there not being a conversation on trade. I think trade will be a big part of what we discuss, in particular when it comes to China. Ivan, if there's anything you want to add?
Yeah, I agree with Alice. And the other aspect, we are focusing on China, but as you can see, as our trade numbers differ, you saw a difference in the trade numbers, that we are also as a country looking at other trade partners to give us, so we're not so dependent on China. So that's what some of the dramatic changes you see in our trade numbers. Don't you agree, Alice?
Yeah. And I think, we're looking at diversifying supply chains. So there's a lot of, I think that goes into the second part of the question from Michael. And I'll read it. With increased focus on global supply chain resiliency and still a lot of uncertainty and unknowns, what are the most important aspects for U.S. manufacturers and logistics providers to prioritize? So resiliency is the word, and depending on what you look at, what you determine of resiliency on your supply chain and your particular sector, in many cases we're seeing redundancy. So there are supply chains that won't leave China. China it's just such a competitive advantage. Not everything makes sense leaving China, but many supply chains are looking at redundancy, a China plus one strategy. So in the event that, we now see what a pandemic looks like, should there be another similar event or a similar shock to the system, how do we have redundancy within the supply chain to ensure that we are resilient? So resiliency takes on, many different terms, alternative suppliers, alternative sources. I think we saw the big shifts in Florida as supply chains were impacted because we are a gateway state. So when we saw the trade numbers and we saw who we're trading with, again, Ireland all of a sudden popped up. But then if we go further down in the trade flows, all of a sudden our trade with Egypt jumped, our trade with New Zealand jumped, because these were supply chain managers, brokers, forwarders, et cetera, all those within the supply chain that were trying to source product content from other parts of the world as China shut down. And we noticed those trade flows change. And we're assuming that some of these things are going to stick. As they saw, this worked, this didn't. We are going to have, they're making decisions to move away from China. What markets have been reliable in terms of becoming primary sources for production? And then, of course, now with USMCA coming in online, well, an updated USMCA or an updated new NAFTA, Mexico is an important market for manufacturing and production. It's also right next to the United States, which is an important competitive advantage within a free trade regime. It's an updated free trade agreement, so it's no longer 1994 language. Services has been included, e-trade has been included, digital commerce, et cetera. So now we have an updated USMCA that will certainly make Mexico much more competitive in terms of being home for supply chain shifts. And being that it's not China, it's now close to the US, truck right away. And for Florida, a couple of hours by ship, half a day, you're all of a sudden in the US marketplace. You no longer have those transportation risks that you have in bringing in product from China. The route from China to Florida is about a month, so 30 days. I know for the West Coast, it's about half a month, so about 2 weeks. But for us, shipping a product from China takes a full month. It crosses the border in Mexico in a couple of days. So those decisions supply chain managers are going to need to make. Does the cost make sense? Does making your supply chain more resilient by making it closer to a primary market and customers in the United States make sense? Resiliency is the key word, and it'll be defined by everyone in a different way.
It appears that for all intents and purposes from watching the news, that China is starting to feel the impact of a second wave of the coronavirus.
Yep.
And it sounds like you guys are preparing for that. What are your preparations?
So one of the things that, Ivan mentioned, we've added Supply Chain Americas to our air cargo conference. And already air cargo, for those that have participated in air cargo, and GLT Logistics was one of them. We do have a lot of logistics providers in Air Cargo America's trade show. And the reason for doing that is because we started noticing, as COVID came along, but even before COVID, the US imposed tariffs on China. There was a lot of products that were no longer being sourced from China because of the tariffs. So pre-COVID, we started seeing the shifts in supply chains with China to places like Vietnam. So our trade with Vietnam changed, but it also continued during COVID, and we're beginning to assume that some of those supply chains were shift. So of course, as a World Trade Center in Miami, located in Florida, we're looking at what are competitive advantages for Florida. How does Florida benefit? How do we grow our trade? How do we increase our trade relationships? Well, how do we promote the Americas as a sourcing destination, as a, either a China plus one strategy, come to somewhere in the Americas, go to Colombia, go to Mexico, go to Central America. Those are things that are, really important to us here in the state of Florida. They benefit the region economically. It's, obviously anything that benefits Latin America GDP, grows trade, grows investment, creates jobs, also benefits us here in Florida, and conversely, broadly throughout the United States. So for us, it's promoting our trading partners, and in particular, our relationship with the Americas. How as supply chain managers are making decisions, can we continue to promote the Americas as a destination, or as part of their China plus one strategy, or their new place for sourcing content or manufacturing or producing to supply to the US and global markets? And then of course, here in Miami and Florida, we're not just a gateway, we're a platform. So we have finance. We're the second largest international banking center in the United States after New York. So we can finance trade deals. We're number 2 for international arbitration. So as you're brokering deals around the world, you no longer have to go to Europe or New York. You can come to Miami. So we're promoting our trade routes and trade gateways. Miami International Airport is one of the primary international gateways around the world. Number 10 in international freight globally. Number 1 for the United States. So for us, we're just promoting what we have in terms of assets. If you want to source in the Americas, great, we'll move your product in Miami.
And when we have an abundance of freight forwarders and logistics companies, not only in Miami, but Florida, because of its geographical location. And the one other thing I wanted to add was the COVID crisis has really, changed the focus on China. We know China provides products at a great price, but I think this situation has made a lot of our companies in the United States look at our trade partners, our trade partners in the Western Hemisphere. So maybe I don't have to wait that long to get my product from China, but I can get it from Mexico, I can get it from Canada, might be able to get it from Argentina faster, here, and not depend solely on just one country for our products.
Great. Looks like Michael his final question looks like a good one too. On a broad scale, do you foresee any significant changes in the balance of power in global trade relationships? Any traditional powers receding? Any new powers emerging? What do you guys think about that? Yeah.
Well, it's a matter of perspective. I think what we've seen and what we know is, even though we're looking at GDP race, who's got the bigger GDP, China and the United States, and China has certainly risen in predominance, the US is still the number 1 consumer market in the world. Like, the whole world wants to sell to the US. And even despite where we're at with COVID and decline in demand, there's still fairly significant demand in the United States. The United States is also still the currency of choice. So if you look at the value of the dollar compared to other currencies, we still have a fairly strong dollar. And while that impacts our exports, the strong dollar is an indication of confidence in the US economy by the world. So it's not just us that say, oh, we're number 1. When you look at the value of the dollar and whether or not it's declined, the world is telling us that they depend on the US dollar, that they have confidence in the economy, and they're still looking to market and to sell to the US. So as a World Trade Center, Ivan can tell you, we get calls from companies that are interested in selling to the US. We have our America's Food and Beverage show that's coming up in November. We're still selling booths people still want to come, even though it's in November, even though we're in a pandemic. We really did expect that our show was going to be negatively impacted in significant ways. And not that it hasn't, but it hasn't been as negatively impacted as we thought, because people are still interested in the US marketplace. They're still interested in bringing their product to the United States. They're still trying to say, we get calls from the Caribbean. Hey, I'm expecting shipments to the US. Is COVID going to impact my imports from the US into the Caribbean? So we know from a hemispheric perspective, at the very least, that there's still a lot of focus on the US economy and the US marketplace, that there is a sort of tension between the US and China. And I think, the first question from Michael was a pretty interesting one about, going into the election cycle. The United States is going to have an election in November. That will certainly have an impact on things. China is someone to watch. And I think trade, we talk about goods, we talk about widgets, we talk about stuff that goes in the container. Trade is also services. You all in the logistics world are service providers. You cannot export without a service. You cannot export without logistics providers. So you're also an important component of our export portfolio. And the US has a surplus in the export of services. We're the #1 exporter of services in the world. And that speaks to, import flows, that speaks to, what we value, how much of a marketplace we are. We're also #1 for foreign direct investment. And that also speaks to the confidence in the US economy and how much foreign direct investment still comes into the US. And Ivan can tell you, we get calls from companies, Europe, that are still interested in investing in Miami. In the middle of a crisis, they're saying, hey, I still want to invest. I still want to open my operation here. Can you help?
And Dan, that's why we're creating this database, because Alice and I just started at the World Trade Center. This is a new era for our organization. And we want to be the B2B platform for everybody in the Western Hemisphere. So that's why we're creating this database. We want to get as many companies. You don't have to be from Miami. You can be from South Florida. You can be, I know we have somebody from Iowa. We have somebody from Malibu. You can just fill out the simple survey, and anytime we get a request, we will refer it out and try to put together the two people who are trying to do business.
Well, you guys certainly have come a long way since back in the day when Miami was simply a jump point to the Caribbean and South America. So yeah, good job on your behalf.
We have a great infrastructure here in Miami. We have Miami International Airport. We have the Port of Miami. We also have Port Everglades, Port of Palm Beach. I mean, all of Florida. We have 15 deepwater seaports in the state of Florida. I think 7 international airports that actually handle cargo. And I mean, we're just in the middle of the hemisphere. We're perfectly located geographically to do business, and not only for our hemisphere, but for Europe. And hopefully with Asia, we'll get an Asia flight soon here in Miami that's nonstop.
Good luck with that. That's a long flight. We got another question for you.
We do have Cathay Pacific, Korean Air, and a couple other Asian, but of course, it's just cargo and it goes through Anchorage. So we really need a nonstop to Florida.
Good luck. Good luck.
Thanks.
I hope you get that. Another question here from an anonymous attendee. Great market insight, guys. Do you feel Q4 peak season will make up some of the ground lost in trade, or will there continue to be a downshift at recession or depression levels in trade for the remainder of the year?
So I think there's been a lot of talk of letters in the alphabet. Is this going to be a V-shaped recovery? I think we're beginning to see that V is probably likely out of the question, with the exception of a few sectors. So if you saw the trade numbers, agriculture, food and beverage, I mean, we're still eating and that's still trading. So, and in some cases we're eating more because we're home and we're cooking and things like that. So there's certain sectors where we're going to see, and I think that to answer that question, we have to look at it sector by sector. Not every sector is going to recover in any way, shape, or form by the end of 2020. And there's sectors that are going to be completely and totally devastated. I mean, we saw the energy sector, oil prices were down fairly significantly. And, that's a sector that'll take a long time to recover. And I think, the world is also looking at it from a different perspective of, is this the time to move towards, renewables versus depending so much on oil? So that question has been, even before COVID, we saw that. So COVID also gave a big negative impact to energy. So sector by sector, I think we'll see certain things come back. It'll be more like a W or a U. Some will do okay. I wouldn't say back to, 2019 numbers by the end of 2020, but there'll be some that'll be flat, for example. It also all depends on what happens with China. Are they, we're seeing a second wave come back. What does that second wave move? Are they going to shut down factories? They're shutting down some parts of China, not all of China. Brazil is another one. And then we know that Latin America has been in, and Mexico is a big production center. And we know that the numbers in Mexico are beginning to be a little more troubling. What's going to happen to Mexico? So I think it all depends on what we call the second wave, how that impacts production centers on recovery. And of course, certain sectors will be okay, but there'll be others that are just going to be devastated, unfortunately.
Is Brazil a big production center?
Yes, it is.
That? Okay, so you see what's going on down there right now. They're just beginning they're in the middle of their first wave.
Yep. And Brazil is not necessarily as big of a global production center as Mexico and China or India and Vietnam are. Brazil supplies significantly to South America. So Argentina depends on Brazil. So what happens in Brazil impacts that South American region fairly significantly, which also impacts the world conversely, because these are centers of trade for everyone else. So we bring in a lot of product.
And Brazil is Florida's #1 trade partner. So it used to be said, if Brazil sneezes, Florida gets a cold.
Well,
so
that's funny.
See how it goes.
It's funny you say that, because the next question is a perfect segue. I mean, how dependent is Miami and Florida in general on Latin American trade? And
so as one of the figures that I mentioned, 60% of U.S. trade flows, so two-way trade with Latin America, go through Florida, and in particular, Miami. So it isn't just Florida or Miami trade. We handle here in South Florida in particular, really it's Miami, the epicenter of trade for the state. But in the state of Florida, we handle more than half of U.S. trade flows with the region. So when trade slows down in the region, we're first hit. And when I mean trade flows, I don't just mean manufactured product. I also mean services. So a lot of what we handle here, because we're big major distribution centers for the U.S. for product that comes in from all over the world, in particular from Latin America, but also imports and exports. All of that is 60% of that is handled here in Florida, but mainly in South Florida. So for us, it is a concern. We're looking very cautiously at what's happening in Latin America. Again, the reports are troubling. The IMF is reporting another lost decade. If you remember the lost decade from the 80s, that was a big hit to Latin America, which impacted Florida. Now more in particular, while Latin America is an important market, and while Ivan mentioned Brazil is #1 for exports, we are much more diversified. So we export more services now in Miami than goods.
wow.
So services matter a lot more. And when you think about service markets, that's reflective of the United States. Developed economies become services exporters over commodity exporters. Latin America is a big commodity exporter. That's an emerging developing market. But the United States and Miami in particular Miami reflects what's happening in the U.S. economy. But Miami and Orlando export more services than they do goods. And so the services exports are becoming much more important. So when we think about services exports, again, if you can't make it, mine it, or grow it, it's a service. And a big part of our services exports are tied to finance, accounting, engineering. All of that is still happening from your laptop from home. And so while we may not be moving a lot of products and our volumes may be down and trade flows may be down, services flows are also part of that. And those markets are primary markets like Europe, like Japan, like Canada, are big export destinations of services that are here. Think about online learning. If you're attending a university here in Miami and you're still learning online, that's a services export. There's value there. So the question really depends, are you talking about goods and services? Even Europe is a primary market now for a lot of our exports. Germany is a top 5 market. The UK is a top 5 market for goods movement. So we've diversified who we trade with. And so while Latin America is an important market, because as a market here in Florida and in Miami, not only are we exporting more services, but we've diversified who we trade with. So Europe is also an important source of trade. Another thing that's happened is that our economy has also changed. So a lot of what we do here in Florida is now more advanced manufacturing. So our trade with Europe is that we're building things together. We're building planes with Europe. We're building cars with Europe. Well, our trade with Latin America is more commodity, final product, consumption based. It's ready to go and it gets distributed to markets, supermarket stores, retails. But our trade with Europe is based on, assembling products, building things together, advanced manufacturing, medical devices. This is a different kind of trade. So again, Latin America is important, but now we have another important market in Europe in that our trade has, the type of trade, what we trade and how we trade has also changed over the past 10 years.
It's not only just a new it's not only just a new normal, but it's a new economy.
Yep.
It really is. It really is. And it's an ever-changing dynamic for sure. Okay, we got another one here. Pretty good presentation. Thank you. In Central America, we have seen some delays moving cargo, especially with Costa Rica putting some restrictions on cargo moving. Have you seen more delays on the transit days of international cargo moving? How should we deal with this? What recommendations are you providing to your associates when shipping international?
Well, we've seen delays. I think a lot of that is COVID related because you need people to move stuff. So inspectors, CBP inspectors, agriculture inspectors, anyone on the customs side, you can't have as many people inspecting a product as you did before. And so that causes delays in and of itself. In a warehouse environment, you can't have that many people working in a warehouse. So they can't put together a container or put together a package as quickly as they once did. So in that end, we are seeing delays and that's happening. But in terms of shipping lines, the shipping routes are still up. The delays are really based on people in that you just have all these additional, protocols that you have to have in an environment such as a warehouse or an inspection station that, customs has to deal with, or if it's an agriculture inspection or an FDA inspection, getting people there. People are sick, so maybe that inspector is no longer available. Now you got to find an additional inspector that can be there. Furloughs, that's the other part that are affecting delays. Ivan, I think you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, and in Central America as well. Also there is also a priority of what we need. At the very beginning of the whole COVID crisis, it was we need PPE. So everything else was had to put aside. There was a backlog already when the first few weeks of this, nobody wanted to move anything. So there was also a backlog of equipment and perishable items and everything we wanted to ship. So that's also one other thing. And the other thing is that I think this whole COVID crisis has really opened everyone's eyes to see how really dependent everybody is on each other and what countries do provide the products that we need at a faster rate. So I think it's a very interesting thing. Like I said, it's a new economy. It's going to be developing. We're going to see new trade partners. We're going to see new countries come, doing business with the United States. And it's just going to be a whole different world. Who would have thought 6 months ago we'd all be in a GLT Zoom 3-day conference talking about how can we, make connections and do business. But we, just doing Zoom, WebEx, and what are the other ones? There's so many platforms right now to do business.
There really are, Ivan. Go ahead, Alice.
And I think, Michael had an earlier question about, how this is impacting. What does resiliency mean? And this is part of the resiliency is, I think we're all learning what supply chain means globally. And all of a sudden, the whole world got an education on supply chain. Again, where's the Cliff Notes version? What is supply chain? What do you mean I can't get this? Why isn't there enough paper towels in the supermarket? How is this not getting there? And it's not that we didn't produce it. It's just that, as Ivan said, certain products were prioritized. So they were sitting in a warehouse, but there's only so many truck drivers. So we've always had in the United States a truck driver shortage. So now we really feel it, especially when COVID impacts some of the truck drivers. And we're now, as citizens of the world, becoming much more aware of supply chain. But Michael's question was, what does resiliency look like? I think part of that resiliency comes to the question about, delays is supply chain resiliency also includes transparency. And people are now much more cognizant, much more aware of trade flows, impacts, delays, sourcing, all of that. And they want to know, where are you bringing this product from? Is it coming from China? Is it coming from Costa Rica? Is it coming from Idaho or wherever it's coming from? And so there's now a greater need, not just for, you know, part of the resiliency question in terms of what supply chains need, but also transparency. People are more aware. They want to know.
And the question I arrived at with a few other speakers was, with the supply chain lapsing during the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, people or manufacturers are now thinking, maybe I should bring my product home. Let me manufacture it here. Let me go USA. That could impact.
And I think we are going to see some of that. I mean, that's been part of some of the phone calls that Ivan and I get, or emails that we get from people is, hey, and not everything can be made in the U.S. I think we saw the administration's doing a push to attract more manufacturing back to the U.S., but that was part of the platform when Trump became president in 2016. But COVID, you know, accelerated that, and that now supply chain managers are asking that question. You know, should I move my manufacturing? It's no longer, it's not just a political thing. Now it's a, you know, I got customers to source, China shut down, I'm out of business. You know, what do I do? How do I get product? How do I move it? So we are going to see some localization, nearshoring or reshoring or whatever the term is at this time. And some of that may come back to the US, but what we're also seeing is that there was a move towards automation. And now companies that are on a timeout because they were not able to produce may be switching to automation. So what does that mean for the manufacturing floor? It was already beginning to be much more automated. So digitalization, automation, 3D printing, you know, how much of this stuff can be 3D printed? You know, can we switch to different types of production? So manufacturing will change, not just in terms of, because COVID requires us to have protocols with, you know, number of people there, the shifts, et cetera, you know, reducing contact amongst, you know, people, but also, is this an opportunity to digitize? Is this an opportunity to automate? So localization, nearshoring, reshoring, regional, you know, sourcing, regional supply chain shuffling, but also automation and digitalization will be a big part of that, you know.
One thing I like to add is that all those companies who want to bring back manufacturing to the United States, the World Trade Center is going to be here to help them export their product too, because the American brand, built in America, made in America, is still very strong globally. I mean, you can go anywhere in the United States, you say, oh my God, there's GM, there's Ford, there's Kellogg, there's Kraft. I mean, there's, you know, and we are here to help them. If they want to bring back manufacturing, we'll help them promote their product in Latin America or all over the world through our network.
Agreed. We still have a few more questions. Let's go. It looks like Michael Cholman has got another one for you. I love his questions. To what extent, if at all, does highly publicized domestic unrest, like we are seeing in the U.S. now in recent weeks, influence or impact global trade activity? Interesting question.
It is an interesting question. So I think we haven't seen any way in terms of global activity, but I think perception is reality at the end of the day. And you know, that's the case with a lot of things. Perception is reality. And I think if there's a perception of global unrest, there might be concern in terms of investment. So not necessarily trade flows, but I think that may impact investment choices in the U.S. We did see some of that impact us when early on in the administration, there was a lot of conversation on restricting immigration. And investment is tied to immigration. You know, if you can't bring your manager to set up a manufacturing facility to the U.S. because they require a visa and there's delays on the visa side, and not that there were on the investment side, but perception slowed down investment. I think in this case, in terms of the unrest that we're seeing, domestic unrest, that may have an impact on people making decisions on investment. Not so much trade flows. I think right now, supply chain managers, and you guys are the pros, you're just sourcing product from where you can get it. And, you know, wherever that might be, who's able to provide it, you know, how quickly they can get it and how quick, cost efficient can it be. I mean, at this point, you can't be too picky. But going forward, I think, what we're seeing in terms of a domestic unrest is will likely impact more investment, as well as once people are able to travel, visitation, international visitation. I think that'll be impacted more than anything.
Okay. From Tamaji Kantangar, I hope I said that right, Tamaji. Is it true that some countries are going against dollars, including Russia? If yes, what will be the impact on U.S. trade?
Let me see if I can find that.
Is it true that some countries are going against the U.S. dollar, including Russia?
I can't verify that in terms of, can I prove, but anecdotally, that's been a rumor that there is some sort of hedging against the US dollar. I think at the end of the day, it's global confidence in the American economy. I mean, the Fed has stepped up in terms of ensuring that there's a money supply. And if you look at the Fed documents, the reports from the Fed, they've ensured that it's shored up, and the dollar is still strong. So while there may be some hedging against the American dollar, and we've heard that anecdotally that Russia is one of those that's acting against the U.S. dollar. At the end of the day, what other currency in the world do people have confidence in? I mean, we know that the second largest economy being China, there's always concern of currency manipulation. That's not the case with the U.S. So at the end of the day, I think the bigger question is there confidence in the U.S. dollar? And I think the answer is yes. And might it have an impact? Maybe minor, but at the end of the day, the world still trades with the dollar. The world still has confidence in the U.S. dollar, and the world still has confidence in the U.S. economy.
And Dan, to pull that data is a lot.
I'm sure.
It would be a lot to pull that data.
But there's always somebody trying to buck up against the dollar, though. There's always somebody trying to beat it.
How is that going on?
Hey, let's bring it back home now. How about this question from an anonymous attendee? Considering climate change, what risk does Miami face with sea level rise and working temperature? What are you doing to address any of these risks?
Yeah, here in Miami, in the city of Miami, and the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce, they have a resiliency committee that is working on all those questions on how Miami is going to be affected by climate change. And they meet on a regular basis, almost like every 3 weeks, to talk about it. There's going to be a report that's going to be let out, probably an initial report sometime in January of next year. But if you can go to, there's a website called from Florida International University on climate change. And there they have the first study on how Miami is going to be affected by climate change and how business is going to be affected by climate change.
Yeah, and
the website, you'll find it there.
And the state of Florida now has a resiliency officer. So that's something that holistically, it's not just Miami. We have a lot of coastal cities, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Jacksonville being coastal cities, and not to, knock on wood, we've started hurricane season here. So Florida is always, mindful of what might happen on hurricane season, and climate change has an impact on tropical storms and hurricanes. So for us, it's, particularly now more than ever, it's something that we pay more attention to. To Ivan's point, not only from a business perspective in terms of the Miami Chamber, but the city of Miami also has a resiliency focus on trying to bring in new technologies to mitigate for climate change. How do we grow? How do we develop as a city? What is it that we can do to reinforce our existing infrastructure? So a lot of that is being studied from a state of Florida perspective on a variety of coastal cities within the state of Florida, but even from a Miami's perspective, both public and private leaders are well aware of the risk. We've already felt the impacts. I mean, the last tropical storm we've had significant flooding. So increasingly, we do see a lot more flooding in the city, those of us that live here. It is an awareness issue, but I think the leadership is there, and now the business community is also aligned with public leadership to work towards solutions and address resiliency for our community here in South Florida.
It's quite a hot topic, no pun intended. But considering that the climate, I mean, I'm looking forward to beachfront property eventually someday if I live here long enough. But it is a hot topic, and one that I'm glad that Miami's paying attention to, and I hope a lot of the other coastal cities are doing so as well. Here's another question from Tamaji, and let's see if we can get this out correctly. At what confidence level are you for the U.S. to move without trading with China? Do you think that the U.S. had enough time or prepared for a radical shift in supply chain? For example, something that China was on about 10 or 20 years ago. I think the question here is more, do you understand the question, Alice?
Yeah, I think I understand the question. So, but it's not really a U.S. decision. It's a
No.
you know, private sector decision. You know, companies have to make those choices based on their bottom line. I mean, you all are supply chain managers. You all know how supply chains work. There's production in China that's fairly significant that can't go anywhere else. I mean, it is what it is. I think what we're looking at in terms of redundancy, a China plus one strategy. Yes, supply chains are going to move out of China, and certainly the administration is encouraging supply chains to move to the U.S. and out of China. But you know, the idea of protectionism is against capitalism and free enterprise. You know, at the end of the day, we are a capitalist economy. Free enterprise rules the day, and companies which are, you know, publicly and privately traded make decisions based on bottom line. And while COVID certainly has added to the reasons why they'll leave China, I don't foresee that there'll be a protectionist environment where we produce everything in the U.S. because it's impossible. We don't make everything here. There's no way that we can make everything here. And also, you know, as a consumer, you know, you choose with your pocketbook. You don't want to pay $10 for a tomato. You just don't. And you're not going to. You're just not going to eat it.
Just think of all the auto parts that are built in China. Just think of what Boeing, the parts of planes that Boeing built in China. Just think of just one day you stop. It's just like Alice says. You got to go where the consumer's going, and we talked about it a couple weeks ago. It's an interesting subject.
Yeah, I mean, look at consumer prices and the choice of the consumer. We do a lot of comparison shopping, especially now online. You know, naming, you know, store one, you look at the price in Walmart for this TV, look at the price in Target for this TV, look at the price in BrandsMart or Best Buy for this TV, and you choose obviously the best price for your pocketbook. And bringing all of that production to the U.S., you know, people are going to make decisions based on, you know, cost differentiation. And some things, you know, you don't have to have a new TV. You know, you want a new TV, but you don't necessarily have to have a new TV. So it's impossible for companies to uproot everything from China and move it to the U.S. And we're not set up to produce everything here anyway. I mean, it's part of, you know, globalization. But it is something that, you know, many supply chains will be making that decision. We're hopeful that they move to the Americas, because that benefits us here in Miami and South Florida and Florida in particular. The more trade, the more supply chain shift to the Americas, the better, you know, we're going to be in terms of trade. So we're hopeful for that, and we're certainly promoting any way that our partners here in the Americas can benefit from those supply chain shifts, because that benefits us.
Excellent. Okay, lastly, one of the early questions is how can I sign up to be a part of the Miami International Trade?
Well, we don't have a membership at the World Trade Center Miami, but you can sign up if you want to be. You include your company in our database. We do have the survey. And it's going to ask you what's your company name, you know, who's the contact person, what product lines are you in, what are you looking for, and it's a little bit more extensive. But we can send, if you're interested, you can just send us an email to info@worldtrade.org. It's info@worldtrade.org, and we will send you a link to the questionnaire. Also, you can go to our website at worldtrade.org, and the survey will be there, and you can fill it out online. And then as we start receiving referrals and people looking for trade partners, we will contact you.
Yeah, I just put all the information in the chat.
Thank you so much, Alice. I saw that. That was great. Ivan, Alice, you guys were wonderful and very, very conversive and very knowledgeable, and we certainly appreciate all of your insight. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, guys.
Good luck with the rest of your program.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.